Welcome back to another TerranScapes video. This is another question and answer episode, rather than blather on, we'll just jump right into the questions. So the first one comes from Robert. Robert asks, as a terrain modeler, I've pretty much just started. I've done a dozen super high fantasy pieces and taken them to my local game store. They've sold all of them and say that they have customers asking for more. Congratulations, Robert. I would love to try your resin casting method, but I'm unsure how to go about it. Your video on the subject was informative, but I guess I can't wrap my brain around it. Anyway, I could get a link to could I get a link to a video that helped you? Maybe even a list of the materials needed. So let's see. First, I would say that casting with resin is easier than you might think. And casting with plaster as a start is a good beginning, actually, because the process is the same, but when you're working with plaster, it's a little easier to have mistakes, and the materials are, significantly less up front. But if you wanted a beginning video to help you get started, I suggest taking a look at Smooth-On's videos. Smooth-On produces a whole line of videos that go along with their products, and I use mostly Smooth-On materials when I do my casting. For myself, I use Smoothcast 321. You can go to the Smooth-On website to see descriptions of all these products. But I use Smoothcast 321 for most of my urethane plastic casts, and I like to use Moldstar 30. That's my preferred silicone rubber that I use. But there are a wide variety of ways to cast with plastics. So by looking at the Smooth-On videos, you'll see a variety of different kinds of applications that they're using their products on, and depending on what kind of a project you're looking to cast, you can sort of tailor the materials to that you might be interested in. I also recommend that people also check out Brick in the Yard videos. Brick in the Yard is another casting supplier, and they do fantastic videos utilizing their products for a comparison. But you can look at both of these companies and their tutorials and basically get the concept of how to go about a process, and then purchase the products that you're interested in from whatever vendor you feel most comfortable with. I've never purchased Brick in the Yard materials. I think they're a little bit more expensive than Smooth-On, but I've sort of just entered the Smooth-On world and stayed with it right from the get-go. So rather than point you to a specific video, I say take a look at a broad range of their videos, because it depends on whether you're casting a large object that needs to be backed by foam, whether you're casting small one-sided pieces, or you're doing a two-sided mold that requires a split mold, to demold it. There's a wide variety of ways you can go about it. So take a look at their videos. I think they'll get you off to a good start, and should you have specific questions on a specific process, you can revisit the question and answer segment, and I'd be happy to address that later in a future episode. He also asks, do I carve every single board piece by hand, and what's the estimated time for an average board? All the modular boards that I sell, I do carve by hand. I thought about getting into casting those boards, but I found that if I want to have it done professionally, there's a tremendously large upfront cost. And I actually did a mold of a board in the past myself, thinking I might try to cast them. But I produce such a variety of boards that becomes a crazy expense up front to make all the molds, as well as a storage issue, and I'm constantly changing those boards and thinking about how I can improve them. So I do carve them all by hand. How long do they take? I don't know. It varies on the board, and it varies on the size. Sometimes I'm doing larger boards as a custom project, but I'd say, I don't know, it's hard to estimate. If I do maybe one of the Martian river boards that has a lot of the sculpting along the sides, just to carve the board, I'll do some mental math here, let's say 15 minutes to cut the board itself, 15 minutes to cut the channel, but that's not really fair because it's more time to set up the table and less time to cut each board, but maybe we'll average at that. And then to sculpt the cliff sides, let's put that in as another 40 minutes. I'm really bad with keeping track of my time. and then final, sort of, shaping of the bottom channel, maybe another 15 minutes. So what is that? An hour and a half, maybe, to carve it, ballpark, plus or minus 15 minutes, let's say. And he says, thank you for your inspiration, and truthfully, without you, I would never have started making terrain, and love it. And I love it. I can read. And normally I would cut out some of those compliments, although I do appreciate them greatly. But I wanted to include it here just to, sort of reflect on it and just say I'm really happy to be an inspiration to other people. And it's sort of a paying it forward, I always think, because there's a lot of people out there that have been really inspirational to me. And there's always somebody, one notch above that you can draw inspiration from, that you can draw clues from to further your own hobby or, your own marketing, should you be getting into this as a sort of side business or full-time if you're crazy. But anyway, I just wanted to say thank you for, finding me inspirational, and there are definitely people out there that inspire me. So we're all a big community in the end. Let's see here. Rob, Andrew. It's signed Andy. Andy asks, I recently bought How to Build, so I'm putting in quotes here, the title is How to Build Realistic Model Railroad Scenery by Dave Frey. And I might have a copy of that around, I'm not sure. There's a fairly in-depth section on scratch building trees from natural materials, weeds, sagebrush, trunks, branches, etc. These are visually stunning examples of model making, but I'm a little hesitant to work with this method in Wargame scenery out of my concern for overall durability. Do you have any ideas regarding how I can improve their structural integrity? Frey recommends using matte medium to lock down the bark to the actual wood materials, but would water down PVA create a stronger form. I know you prefer to go the pre-made route for things like trees because they yield reliable, repeatable results, but I was just wondering if you had any insights into such issues and how to improve a delicate structure's strength and tolerance for clumsy table practice. I don't have a good answer for how to get durability out of natural materials. Mainly because that is the problem with natural materials. They have a durability issue. If you want to use, I've seen people use roots. So they'll take a plant with a nice root structure, they pull it out of the soil gently, turn it upside down, dry it out, and they use those roots as the branching structure, which is very nice because it produces a very random form with a lot of fine branching at the tips. It emulates branching really well. There is also another product, I think, running through my head here, I believe Silflor makes it. It's called Sagebrush Trees, and it's a very fine branching twig, if you will, which has a very sort of soft clump of fine branching filaments off the ends, and then you flock those, and has a decent trunk structure, but it has a wonderful branching, and that is another natural material. But for durability, these things are going to be plagued with, what's the word I'm looking for? They have a very low bend forgiveness, right? They go too far and they snap, so they're not very yielding to bending. But I was thinking about it actually on my drive out tonight, and I was thinking about your comment about PVA or matte medium using to seal these things, and it occurred to me that perhaps you could take these kinds of branches and soak them, maybe overnight. I haven't done this before, but soak them overnight in a dilute PVA water solution. Maybe add a couple drops of jet dry or dish detergent to act as a surfactant, and by soaking them overnight, you give it time to really get into the pores of the wood fibers, and when that dries, it may add a significant structural strength to the plant. So I might try that myself actually, because you really can get exquisite detail from natural materials that just can't be easily emulated through precast armatures, that sort of idea. You know, the only alternative between these two extremes, right, you have the armatures, cast, you have the natural materials, and somewhere in the middle is making your own wire form and then sculpting bark onto that. And I'm not going to get into details on how to do that, but there are many videos out there on how to do it and a lot of tutorials online. But by twisting up wire and then adding wire and twisting that up to make the shorter and smaller and more branchier ends of your trees or shrubs, and then coating that material, coating the wire with a, you know, like a plaster-like material, epoxy sculpt. There's a whole variety of ways that can be done. Even plaster of Paris or sculpt a mold is an example of paper mache. Then you can build up those trunks to get really nice texture on them. It takes more time to do that. It's much more labor intensive, but it gives you the most control over the final product. So, I don't know. If you try soaking these things in PVA, watered down glue, or something similar, and it works, let me know and I'll pass that along. I might try it out myself. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Or, you know, alternatively, ask your gamers to be gentle with them. Jared asks, I've been using the Hotwire Foam Factory tools for a while, and every time I use the 4-inch knife, I seem to be getting a lot of angel hair on my pink foam. Angel hair, as an aside, is when you cut foam and you end up with streaks of melted foam basically along the cut line. It produces a very fine hair-like structure, and people refer to that as angel hair. Especially after cutting detailed work like cliff faces, canyons, and it's always so much work to get rid of the angel hair. Do you have any tips on how to reduce the amount of angel hair and or how to effectively and quickly remove them after cutting foam? Well, I wish I had done the experiment I planned on doing before I did this video. I have the 4-inch knife, and I do know it produces a lot of angel hairs, and that's not necessarily the fault of the 4-inch knife that the Hotwire Foam Factory produces per se, but it is a factor of surface area and temperature. When I use Hotwire tables, I believe they produce less because the blade has less surface area and runs at a hotter temperature. This is my theory. Please feel free in the comments section to correct me if anybody knows more about this. I'm no electrical master, hence my problems with LED lighting, but that's my suspicion. When I have used you know, their freehand router, the 6-inch knife, the 4-inch knife, all of these share a little bit of that issue. My suspicion, and I wish I had tested this. If I test it later, I'll put a little addendum in the description to this, or maybe an annotation. But my suspicion is attempting to cut faster than the temperature of the blade really prefers. So trying a slower cut will give a cleaner melt along the cut line and will probably produce a cleaner cut overall. It becomes a matter of patience. You know, there is a limit to how hot you can get the blade using the Hotwire Foam Factory's power station. They have a variable watt power station. I have done reviews of all of these things in the past. If you're new to the channel, welcome. There's the back finger. Go take a look at those videos way back in the past. You know, when I use the same power regulator on their 24-inch, you know, deluxe table, you know, it does not produce angel hairs, but I'm also using a much finer blade, wire, if you will. But of course, the thinner the wire, the more resistance it produces, and you get a hotter temperature out of a thicker wire, but it also draws more current. You see how complicated it gets. Current, amps, voltage, resistance, but also the length of the blade, right? How much material is actually being used. If you all stayed with me after that ramble, try turning up the heat to its highest. Try cutting it slower. I will do my own experiment. I will annotate this and put something in the description if I find out something that goes against the information that I'm trying to provide here. So those are my best tips. As for removing them after the fact, sandpaper. A really fine grit sandpaper though, don't go at it with 60 grit or 80 grit. It's too abrasive to the foam and you're going to tear the foam. I find 180 grit to be kind of my happy medium. It's abrasive enough to score off material relatively quickly, but is not going to actually abrade into the surface of the foam if you're gentle with it. So I would try 180 or 200 grit and make yourself various tools using that depending on the kind of surface you're trying to carve. So if you're doing, you know, irregular rock surfaces, you know, maybe just having with flat planes is what I'm saying, you know, flat on the outside planes, you know, a flat small piece torn into maybe a 1 or 2 inch piece would allow you to get in there and scrub that out. But if you're doing you know, deep carves into the material, you may need to get a piece and fold it into a V and, you know, use that as a material. And if you have some other shapes that you feel like you need a custom piece for, carve a custom piece of foam using your 4-inch, you know, knife, and then you can wrap the sandpaper to that to get whatever shape you may need. So that is probably the best tip I have for removing it. It usually breaks free pretty easily. There usually are some attachment points where it has melted into the surface that you've been carving. Those are a little more difficult to remove, but some light grade sandpaper is probably your best bet. If anybody has a better tip than that, of course, comment down below. Be great. Let's see here. Kevin writes, I am struggling with modeling elephant grass in 15mm scale. Our local Flames of War club has been playing Tour of Duty lately, and elephant grass is an important feature in these games. My thought was using small sections modeled heavily with the grass that allows players to shift the grass pieces around during gameplay. This is my motion, not Kevin's. The challenge arises in locating a product or modeling technique to model the elephant grass without creating a cartoonish effect at 15mm. I've explored static grass, but the longest grass I can find is 12mm, and actually I was surprised because the longest I've found is 8, and neither is really a good choice for this. As he says, it's not quite tall enough. Although, worst case scenario, the 12mm static grass would be a last choice. Most of the grasses, these grow, he's talking about the actual grass, grow to 8 to 12 feet tall and even higher. At scale, that's approximately 1 inch to 1.5 inch. I've considered using a natural product, but they may not stand up to rough handling. Any thoughts or advice would be greatly appreciated. He attached actually a picture of this elephant grass, and if I can, when I edit this video, if I can find a picture, I'll stick it here for you. The trouble, when I looked at elephant grass, actually I looked online at a couple clips, a couple pictures of elephant grass, and it is a challenge because it is a very dense, fine-bladed grove that also has a very floppy top to it. So, you know, it's a very sort of like a pampas grass or something like that, where it weeps, if you will, at the top. That's the trick, actually, I think, in my mind, for this kind of a project. I've been thinking about it actually for a little while now, and I have 2 possible suggestions, neither one which will probably produce the best effect, but they're at least approachable. One would be to use a fine bristle from a broom. I was actually just looking at a tutorial that somebody had posted online about doing shoreline grasses, and I'm always gleaning tutorials myself, and he was using a very high quality broom bristle that he said had silk bristles. That may not be true, but obviously maybe some kind of a nylon, and the ends came to a very nice tapered point. And my thinking with the elephant grass is that you could cut a lot of high quality blades like that from a broom and then bundle them together. In fact, he used some kind of an epoxy putty to embed the bristles into it. That may or may not be needed, but something to consider for experimenting. And then you could paint those bristles. Now, you're not going to get the weeping top, but you're going to get at least, I think, a more realistic to scale blade thickness, and you can easily cut a whole clump of those, embed them, and then paint them, probably by flooding them. I would think I would flood them with a thin paint, let that dry, and then probably have to go over it again as a second time. But that's one option. And you'll have to go and hunt for a good broom for that and look at the bristles very carefully and think they're going to work for you. A cheap one with like sisal fiber bristles is not going to work. My second thought was something a little bit more labor intensive but a little bit more controllable, which would be actually to cut these from paper. If you had access to a paper cutter, you know, one of those sort of school grade, you know, large arm paper cutter, you could rip out handfuls of very, very thinly julienned paper, and then you could clump those together. But the nice thing about paper is it's got some memory to it, so then you could sort of puff the, you know, the tops of them out a little bit to give it a little bit of a weeping effect. If you were really dedicated, you know, when you julienne those, you could try to create points on one of the ends to help it taper a little bit to that point. I haven't done anything quite like that before, but I have seen people do amazing things with paper, and I'm thinking with a large, you know, arm paper cutter, you could cut, you know, hundreds of those pieces relatively quickly rather than trying to go at it with scissors, which I don't actually recommend. So those are my two best thoughts on it, and then it's a matter of painting those and getting them mounted. I can't think of a third. I was trying to think if I had one more option. Woodland Scenics does sell a grass material. I've mentioned it many times before, and I have used it in a lot of projects. It's more like hair. Oh, it's off camera doesn't help. Comes in a little pouch like this, and it has a more like a almost like a human hair in terms of its thickness, consistency. This might work okay for 15 mil. I find tall grasses at 32 mil, it's too fine. It doesn't really have the body that a plant would need at that scale, but for 15 mil it might work. They have a variety of colors, dark green, light green, and you can blend those, you know, pull a bunch of clumps out, blend them together in your hand, and then pull them out, cut them to length, stick them in hot glue or something like that. Hopefully one of those options work for you. If you do come up with a method using one of these or something else, feel free to send me a picture. I'd love to see what you come up with. I don't do a lot of work in 15 mil, and it's always nice to see people taking a different approach to terrain. I always appreciate seeing something new. So good luck with that. Let's see here. Oh, and that is the last question for today. So try to keep it to 4 questions or so, because I'm going long looking at the clock. So I'll wrap it up quickly. If you want to submit a question to the question and answer segment, you can send an email to TerranScapes@gmail.com. I always have trouble remembering that address. And in the subject line, put Q&A. Once I have 4 or 5 in the queue, I pull out the, you know, sort of first in, first out of the list, and I do another episode. So TerranScapes@gmail.com. And if you have any questions or comments on any of the topics that I've covered, please feel free to leave them down below. And as you probably have noticed from my tone, I am not 100% confident on answers to all of these questions myself. So if you have a solution maybe that I didn't address, I'm sure the viewers and the people reviewing the comment section would love to hear it. So please feel free to use that as a forum to share some of your knowledge. So thank you once again for joining me. Keep an eye on the channel. It won't be too long before I come back with another video, and hopefully you'll join me then. Oh my God. It probably won't be too long before I come back with another video, and hopefully you return for me then. And it won't be too long before I come back with another video, and hopefully you'll return to see that